Have you ever felt that chill when someone you trust walks into the room? That moment when their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, and something in your gut twists with uncertainty? You're not alone. When was the last time you sensed something off in a relationship that mattered to you? That invisible wall growing taller with each interaction. Though nothing has been said aloud, this isn't paranoia. It's your psyche's alarm system. Most of us move through life believing we understand the emotional landscape of our closest relationships. We assume we'd know if someone harbored resentment or hatred toward us. But the human mind is far more complex than we give it credit for. The pain of hidden resentment cuts deeper than open conflict. It's the wound you can't see, the poison you can't taste, yet it slowly transforms the foundation of your most trusted connections. Carl Jung recognized that what remains hidden holds the greatest power over us. He understood that beneath our conscious awareness lies a shadow, the parts of ourselves we've denied, rejected, or never acknowledged. This shadow doesn't disappear when we turn away from it. It grows stronger in the dark. In relationships, this shadow manifests in subtle yet unmistakable ways. The person who secretly resents you isn't always plotting your downfall in obvious terms. Instead, their shadow speaks through micro-expressions, unexplained distances, and contradictions between words and actions. What if I told you that recognizing these signs isn't about breeding paranoia, but about developing psychological clarity? What if understanding the dark currents beneath the surface could free you from confusion and self-doubt? The first sign emerges in their eyes. Jung believed the eyes reveal what the mouth conceals. When someone's words say, "I'm fine," but their eyes contain a fleeting coldness, a momentary freeze before they compose themselves, your unconscious has registered a truth your conscious mind hasn't yet accepted. Ask yourself, do they maintain eye contact when speaking to you, but not when speaking about you? Do they look at you differently when they think you're not aware of their gaze? This inconsistency isn't random, it's the shadow peeking through the mask. The eyes reveal what hasn't integrated into consciousness. The hatred or resentment they haven't acknowledged within themselves must find expression somehow. The body speaks what the mind refuses to recognize. Jung would call this the first crack in the persona, that carefully constructed face we present to the world. Behind every persona lies the shadow, waiting for moments of inattention to reveal itself. The second sign manifests in selective memory. Someone who secretly harbors negative feelings toward you will remember your failures with perfect clarity while struggling to recall your successes. Have you noticed someone who can recount in vivid detail the time you disappointed them 3 years ago, but conveniently forgets your consistent acts of kindness? This selective memory isn't conscious deception. It's their psyche building a case against you, gathering evidence that justifies feelings they don't want to acknowledge. Jung would recognize this as projection, attributing to others what we cannot accept in ourselves. When someone's mind becomes a meticulous record keeper of your faults while remaining blind to your virtues, you're witnessing their shadow at work. The truth is, we remember what aligns with our emotional state. Their selective memory tells you nothing about who you are, but everything about what they're struggling with internally. The third sign reveals itself in their reactions to your success. When you share good news, do they respond with a subtle diminishment? "That's nice, but," or "well, you got lucky there." This response isn't about you, it's about what your achievement awakens in them. Jung called this shadow possession, moments when disowned aspects of the self temporarily take control. Your success threatens the narrative they've constructed, perhaps that you don't deserve good things, or that you're somehow beneath them. When reality contradicts this narrative, their shadow rises to defend it. Notice the micro-expressions, the momentary tightening around their mouth, the forced smile that appears too quickly. These split-second reactions expose the gap between their conscious response and their unconscious attitude. What if I told you that your intuition about these moments isn't oversensitivity, it's your unconscious mind communicating with you, recognizing patterns your conscious mind wants to deny? The fourth sign speaks through inconsistency between public and private behavior. Jung understood that authenticity means alignment between our outer and inner worlds. When someone treats you warmly in group settings but becomes cold or dismissive in private, you're witnessing a split in their psyche. This isn't simple two-faced behavior, it's more profound. The person who praises you publicly while undermining you privately is caught in a psychological conflict. Their social self knows how they should act, while their shadow harbors contradictory feelings they can't integrate. Ask yourself, do you constantly feel confused about where you stand with someone? Do their words and actions align, or do they leave you questioning your perception of reality? This inconsistency creates what Jung would recognize as a double bind, a situation where contradictory messages prevent you from responding appropriately. The confusion you feel isn't accidental, it keeps you off balance and prevents you from addressing the underlying issue. The fifth sign manifests in passive aggression, perhaps the purest expression of unacknowledged hatred. The backhanded compliment, the joke with a sting, the help that somehow makes things harder. You look good today for once. I'm surprised you managed to finish that project. Let me help you with that. You always struggle with these things. Jung would view passive aggression as the shadow finding a socially acceptable outlet. The person expresses hostility while maintaining plausible deniability. If confronted, they can always say, "You're too sensitive," or "It was just a joke." The moment you feel that sting but question whether you're overreacting, that's the moment to trust your instinct. Your body recognizes the attack even when the words seem innocent. What makes these signs so damaging is their invisibility. Open conflict can be addressed. Hidden resentment creates psychological quicksand. The more you struggle to make sense of it, the deeper you sink into self-doubt. This brings us to Jung's concept of projection, perhaps his most powerful insight into human relationships. Projection occurs when we unconsciously attribute to others what we cannot accept in ourselves. The person who secretly harbors hatred toward you may be projecting aspects of themselves they cannot face. Consider the friend who constantly accuses you of being selfish, yet never seems to consider your needs, or the family member who questions your integrity while behaving dishonestly. These projections reveal more about the accuser than the accused. Jung would say, what you resist persists. The qualities someone obsessively criticizes in you often reflect their own disowned traits. Their hatred isn't really about you. It's about what you mirror back to them.
The shadow cannot bear to be seen. When you unknowingly reflect someone's shadow back to them, their unconscious responds with hostility directed at the mirror, at you, rather than at the reflection. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior. Understanding the psychological mechanism doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, but it offers a perspective beyond taking their actions personally. Ask yourself, what specific qualities does this person consistently criticize in you? What accusations feel particularly charged or repeated? These patterns point to their projections, the aspects of themselves they're fighting within and without. The truth is, their criticism tells you where their wounds lie. The qualities they cannot tolerate in you reveal what they cannot accept in themselves. Beneath all these signs lies the unconscious, that vast territory of the mind operating beyond our awareness. Jung understood that consciousness is merely the tip of the iceberg. The forces driving our behavior often remain hidden,
even from ourselves. This explains why someone who secretly harbors hatred toward you may genuinely deny such feelings when confronted. They're not necessarily lying, they may lack conscious access to their own emotional reality. Have you ever heard someone insist, "I'm not angry," through clenched teeth and a reddening face? This disconnect between conscious awareness and unconscious feeling creates the most confusing relationships. The person may tell themselves stories to justify their behavior. "I'm just holding them accountable," or "I'm helping them improve." Meanwhile, their unconscious motives remain opaque to them. This is why addressing these dynamics rarely works through direct confrontation. Asking, "Do you hate me?" will likely trigger denial. The unconscious protects itself from awareness until the person is ready to integrate that knowledge. What if I told you that recognizing these patterns isn't about assigning blame, but about reclaiming your psychological clarity? What if understanding the unconscious forces at play could free you from the fog of confusion these relationships create? Jung believed that what remains unconscious controls us. Only by bringing these dynamics into awareness can we begin to transform them. The moment you recognize these signs for what they are, expressions of the shadow, projections of disowned parts, manifestations of unconscious conflicts, you regain the power to respond rather than react. This recognition doesn't mean severing connections. Sometimes it means establishing clearer boundaries. Sometimes it means responding to the pain beneath the behavior rather than the behavior itself. And sometimes, yes, it means stepping away from relationships that consistently undermine your well-being. The unconscious drives seemingly irrational behaviors in relationships. The colleague who sabotages your work despite it hurting them too. The friend who pushes you away when they need support most. The family member who criticizes your choices while repeating the same patterns they claim to despise. Jung would view these contradictions as different aspects of the psyche in conflict. The conscious mind wants connection, while the unconscious harbors fear or resentment. The result is behavior that makes no logical sense but serves a deeper psychological purpose. Ask yourself, what benefit might someone gain from maintaining negative feelings toward you? What need might their behavior fulfill, even if they're not aware of it? Often, hatred serves as protection against vulnerability, against facing one's own failures, against the risk of being hurt. Understanding this doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it illuminates the human struggle beneath it. The truth is, sometimes you represent something to them that has nothing to do with who you actually are. You've become a screen onto which they project unresolved conflicts, fears, or desires. Jung would say that until they withdraw these projections and recognize them as parts of themselves, no authentic relationship is possible. You're interacting not with them, but with the distorted image they've created of you. What if I told you that the confusion, self-doubt, and pain these relationships cause isn't evidence of your failure, but of an unconscious process seeking resolution? What if these difficult dynamics contain the seeds of deeper self-understanding for both of you? Every shadow encounter offers an invitation to see more clearly, to understand more deeply, to respond more authentically, not just to their behavior, but to your own reactions. For Jung, the ultimate goal wasn't to eliminate the shadow, an impossible task, but to integrate it through conscious awareness. The same applies to navigating relationships where hidden resentment lurks. When you bring consciousness to these dynamics, something shifts. You're no longer caught in unconscious reactivity. You're no longer taking personally what isn't about you. You're no longer doubting your perception when your body is sending clear signals. This clarity doesn't guarantee the relationship will heal,
but it guarantees that you will be approaching it from a place of psychological integrity rather than confusion. The next time you sense that chill when someone enters the room, the next time words and actions don't align, the next time your gut tightens with unnameable discomfort, pay attention. Your unconscious is speaking to you, recognizing patterns your conscious mind might prefer to deny. Your intuition isn't irrational, it's your psyche's intelligence at work, perceiving what remains unspoken. The path forward isn't about confirming whether someone secretly hates you, it's about honoring your experience, setting appropriate boundaries, and responding to reality rather than illusion. It's about refusing to participate in unconscious dynamics that undermine your well-being. Your intuition isn't irrational, it's your psyche's intelligence at work, perceiving what remains unspoken. The path forward isn't about confirming whether someone secretly hates you, it's about honoring your experience, setting appropriate boundaries, and responding to reality rather than illusion. It's about refusing to participate in unconscious dynamics that undermine your well-being. But to navigate these waters skillfully, we must go deeper into Jung's understanding of the human psyche, particularly his concepts of the persona and the shadow. The persona in Jungian psychology is the mask we wear in social situations, the face we present to the world. It's not inherently false, but a necessary interface between our inner complexity and outer society. Think of it as the psychological clothing we put on to meet social expectations. The shadow, by contrast, contains everything we've pushed out of conscious awareness, qualities we've denied, rejected, or never integrated. Not just negative traits like anger or selfishness, but sometimes positive qualities too, creativity, power, or vulnerability that felt unsafe to express.
These two aspects of the psyche dance together in every relationship. When someone harbors hidden hatred toward you, the dance becomes distorted. Their persona presents warmth, while their shadow executes hostility through subtle channels. This brings us to the sixth sign: excessive, unnatural flattery. Jung recognized that overcompensation often reveals its opposite. When praise feels hollow, mechanical, or disconnected from reality, it may mask unconscious resentment. Have you encountered someone who compliments you in ways that feel performative rather than genuine, who praises qualities you don't actually possess, or achievements that didn't require special effort? This isn't simple insincerity, it's psychological splitting, the inability to integrate positive and negative perceptions of you. Rather than holding the complexity of who you are, they swing between idealization and devaluation. The flattery serves as a psychological defense, a compensation for feelings they can't acknowledge. The greater the underlying resentment, the more excessive the praise becomes. Ask yourself, does their praise make you feel seen and appreciated, or strangely empty? Do their compliments connect to reality, or do they feel like they're describing someone else entirely? What if I told you that trusting your discomfort with false praise isn't ingratitude, but psychological honesty? What if that unsettled feeling is your authentic self rejecting the distortion? The seventh sign manifests in comparison. Someone harboring secret hatred will subtly position you against others, not to highlight your strengths, but to emphasize your shortcomings. You're so different from Sarah. She always remembers everyone's birthdays. Most people would have finished this by now. Everyone else understood what I meant. Notice how these comparisons isolate. They place you outside some implied norm or standard. This isn't constructive feedback aimed at growth. It's an expression of the archetypical shadow judge, the part of the psyche that condemns without mercy. Jung would recognize these comparisons as projections of the person's own inner critic, that harsh voice they turn outward rather than facing within. By making you the recipient of this judgment, they temporarily escape its weight. The truth is, their comparative statements tell you nothing about your worth, but everything about the standards they fear failing themselves. What if I told you that recognizing this pattern frees you from internalizing their judgment? What if their comparisons are actually invitations to examine where you've been unfairly harsh with yourself? The eighth sign reveals itself in timing, specifically the withdrawal of support precisely when you need it most. This isn't random unavailability. It's a pattern of absence during your moments of vulnerability or necessity. This timing carries archetypal significance, the abandoner emerging at critical junctures. Jung understood that archetypes operate according to their own logic, often triggering when we're most susceptible to their impact. Have you noticed someone who's consistently unavailable during your crises, but expects your presence during theirs, who seems to disappear exactly when their support would matter most, who always has perfectly reasonable explanations for their absence? This pattern isn't coincidental. The unconscious recognizes opportunities to express resentment without accountability. By withdrawing at critical moments, they inflict maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability. Ask yourself, is there a pattern to when this person becomes unavailable? Does their absence seem to coincide with moments when their presence would significantly help you? The moment you recognize this pattern, you reclaim the power to seek support elsewhere, rather than expecting it from those who unconsciously wish to see you struggle. The ninth sign speaks through triangulation, bringing third parties into your relationship dynamic. Someone harboring hidden hatred will subtly recruit others, creating coalitions that isolate you. Everyone agrees with me about this. I was talking to Michael, and he thinks so too. Other people have noticed the same thing. This isn't seeking consensus. It's the archetypal divider at work, splitting relationships to conquer your sense of reality. By implying universal agreement with their perspective, they undermine your confidence in your own perception. Jung would recognize this as a collective projection, extending their shadow not just onto you, but onto their concept of everyone. This expansion serves to solidify their projection, making it seem like objective reality rather than subjective experience. The truth is, when someone consistently references unnamed others who supposedly share their view of you, they're not reporting reality. They're constructing a reality that justifies their feelings. What if I told you that your confusion in these situations isn't a failure of understanding, but a natural response to manipulation? What if trusting your experience, even when it contradicts their narrative, is the beginning of psychological freedom? The 10th sign manifests in boundaries, specifically the consistent violation of yours while rigidly enforcing their own. The person who routinely interrupts you but becomes offended when interrupted, who shares your secrets but guards their own intensely, who enters your space without permission but protects their territory fiercely. This double standard isn't simple hypocrisy. It's the archetypal trickster creating one set of rules for themselves and another for you. Jung understood that the trickster emerges when the psyche attempts to maintain contradictory positions. Notice the pattern. Your boundaries are treated as suggestions, while theirs are inviolable laws. This imbalance creates a one-way relationship where vulnerability flows in only one direction, yours. Ask yourself, do I constantly feel the need to apologize for overstepping with this person while they freely cross my lines? Does interaction with them leave me feeling exposed while they remain guarded? This boundary violation serves the shadow's purpose. By keeping you vulnerable while they remain protected, they maintain psychological dominance in the relationship. The truth is, healthy relationships involve reciprocal boundaries, mutual respect for each other's limits and spaces.
Persistent imbalance signals something beyond mere oversight. These 5 signs, excessive flattery, harmful comparison, strategic absence, triangulation, and boundary imbalance, reveal deeper archetypal patterns at work in relationships where hatred hides beneath the surface. But understanding these signs is only the beginning. To truly navigate these dynamics, we must recognize the profound truth Jung uncovered about human relationships. They function as psychological mirrors, reflecting back to us aspects of ourselves we might otherwise never see. What triggers us in others often reflects unacknowledged aspects of our own psyche. This doesn't mean the hurtful behavior isn't real. It means our specific reaction to it, the intensity, the type of pain it causes, contains information about our own wounds and shadows. Ask yourself, what specifically hurts about how this person treats me? What old wound does their behavior reopen? What fear does it confirm? Your answers reveal not just the impact of their behavior, but the tender spots in your own psyche, places where you've been injured before, beliefs about yourself that their actions seem to validate. What if I told you that the pain in these relationships offers a map to your own healing? What if your strongest reactions point precisely to where your own psychological work lies? Jung called this the shadow gold, the treasure hidden within our most difficult experiences. By paying attention not just to others' behavior, but to our responses, we access deeper self-knowledge. This brings us to Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole by integrating the various aspects of the psyche, including the shadow. Paradoxically, relationships where hidden resentment lurks can serve this process if we approach them consciously. The conflict, painful as it may be, illuminates aspects of ourselves we might otherwise never confront.
Consider how a relationship with hidden hostility forces growth. It challenges your people-pleasing tendencies. It questions your boundaries. It tests your self-worth. It confronts your need for universal approval. These challenges aren't pleasant, but they're profoundly transformative when met with consciousness. The person who secretly resents you becomes, unwittingly, a catalyst for your individuation. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the wisest response to hidden hatred is distance or departure. But even then, the encounter leaves you more whole if you extract its lessons rather than simply escaping its discomfort. The truth is, conflict serves growth when approached as information rather than just injury. Every painful interaction contains a question: what is this asking me to develop, strengthen, or release? Jung understood that meaningful growth rarely comes through comfort. The psyche evolves through challenge, through confronting what we'd prefer to avoid. Relationships with hidden currents of resentment present exactly such challenges. What if I told you that the relationships that disturb your peace often contribute most to your evolution? What if the people who trigger you are unconsciously serving your becoming? To navigate these waters skillfully, we need metaphors that capture the emotional experience. Jung valued metaphor as a bridge between conscious understanding and unconscious knowing. Think of emotions in troubled relationships as internal weather, complex systems moving through your psychological landscape. The chill you feel when someone harboring resentment enters the room is literally a weather change in your emotional body. Their hidden hatred creates storms in your internal atmosphere, thunder that startles, lightning that illuminates briefly but intensely, winds that disorient. These weather patterns aren't imaginary. They're real experiences of your nervous system responding to what words deny, but energy reveals. Notice your internal weather in their presence. Does a fog of confusion descend, making it difficult to think clearly? Does an electrical charge fill the air, putting your nerves on edge? Does a cold front move in, leaving you suddenly chilled despite external warmth? These sensations aren't paranoia. They're your body's wisdom registering what remains verbally unacknowledged. Ask yourself, how does my internal weather change around specific people? What forecast would I give for my emotional state in their presence? Learning to read your internal weather provides critical information about relationships. When consistent storms arise with someone, your body is sending signals worth heeding. But this raises a crucial question. How do we distinguish between legitimate concerns in relationships and mere projections of our own making? How do we know when the problem lies in the relationship versus in our perception? Jung would approach this question not through absolute certainty, but through honest inquiry. The goal isn't to be right about whether someone secretly hates you, but to clarify your own experience and respond appropriately. Start with these discernment questions. Is the pattern consistent or isolated? Projection tends to be absolute. We see the same trait everywhere. Legitimate concerns usually involve specific patterns with specific people. Do trusted others notice similar dynamics, or is your perception isolated? While this isn't definitive, groups can share projections. Consistent feedback from diverse sources suggests something beyond personal projection. Does the pattern trigger disproportionate emotional intensity? When your response far exceeds the apparent stimulus, projection often plays a role. The present situation has tapped into older, deeper material. Can you identify the specific behaviors causing concern, or is it more a feeling or interpretation? Projections often lack concrete examples, relying instead on a general sense or vibe. Legitimate concerns can usually point to specific incidents. Do you notice similar patterns across multiple relationships? If everyone eventually betrays you in the same way, you may be projecting an expectation that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This discernment isn't about assigning blame either to others or yourself. It's about seeing clearly so you can respond wisely. The truth is, most difficult dynamics involve both legitimate issues and projections. The person may indeed harbor unconscious resentment toward you, and you may be projecting additional layers onto their behavior based on your own history. What if I told you that acknowledging the role of projection doesn't invalidate your experience? What if both can be true? They're treating you poorly, and you're bringing your own history to how you interpret that treatment. Jung believed that taking responsibility for our projections doesn't excuse others' behavior. It simply gives us clearer access to what's actually happening, rather than what we fear or assume is happening. This brings us to what Jung might call the battlefield of the psyche, the hidden war within others that sometimes makes us collateral damage. When someone secretly harbors hatred toward you, you've become implicated in their internal conflict. Part of them may genuinely care for you, while another part resents what you represent or trigger in them. You're not imagining the contradiction. They are conflicted about you because they're conflicted within themselves. Their conscious mind may value your friendship, while their unconscious associates you with painful experiences or threatening realizations. Their social self may need your approval, while their shadow resents that very need. This inner battlefield creates the inconsistency that leaves you confused. They're not pretending one moment and revealing their true feelings the next. Both expressions reflect aspects of their divided relationship to you. Ask yourself, what might I represent to this person beyond who I actually am? What role might I play in their internal narrative that has little to do with me personally? Often, we become characters in others' psychological dramas without our knowledge or consent. The boss's difficult child, the parent's disappointing ambition, the friend's abandoned self, the partner's feared abandoner. These unconscious castings explain why someone can react to you with an intensity that seems disconnected from your actual behavior. They're not responding to you, but to who you've become in their internal landscape. The truth is, much of what feels personal in others' treatment of you isn't personal at all. It belongs to stories that began long before you entered the scene. What if I told you that recognizing this could free you from taking responsibility for dynamics you didn't create? What if understanding the battlefield within others could help you stop feeling like the cause of conflicts that existed before you arrived? Jung believed that consciousness transforms relationships, not by changing others, but by changing how we perceive and respond to them. When you recognize that someone's hidden hatred toward you reflects their internal conflict rather than your worth, something shifts. You're no longer desperately trying to fix what you didn't break. You're no longer internalizing messages that weren't actually about you. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the wisest response to someone's projected battlefield is to remove yourself from the line of fire. But even then you leave differently, carrying understanding rather than just hurt.
The hidden war within others teaches us perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. We cannot control how others see us, what they project onto us, or how their unconscious operates. But we can control how we respond, whether we get drawn into their battlefield or maintain our psychological ground. In relationships where hidden resentment lurks, maintaining this ground often means setting boundaries without expecting them to be welcomed. The person caught in projection will rarely appreciate limits on their projecting. Recognizing that their resistance to your boundaries reveals the importance of maintaining them. Understanding that their perception of you exists alongside, not instead of, who you actually are. Their projection doesn't erase your reality, seeking validation from those capable of seeing you clearly, rather than trying to correct distorted perceptions. Remembering that their hidden hatred says more about their internal conflict than about your value or character. Jung understood that we cannot avoid becoming screens for others' projections, but we can avoid identifying with those projections, mistaking others' unconscious material for who we actually are. The moment you recognize projection at work, you're free to respond to the reality of the relationship rather than the illusion it sometimes presents. You're free to say, silently or aloud, that may be who I am in your psyche, but it isn't who I am in reality. What if I told you that this distinction between who you are and who you become in others' internal landscapes contains the key to authentic relationship? What if the most loving thing you can sometimes do for yourself and others is refuse to play the role their unconscious has assigned you? When you step out of these unconscious castings, you create space for something new to emerge, not by changing them, but by changing the pattern of interaction. This is the profound invitation hidden within relationships where resentment lurks beneath the surface, to know yourself beyond others' projections, to hold your center when external storms rage, to distinguish between what belongs to you and what doesn't. Jung believed that the greatest gift we can offer others is to withdraw our projections from them, to see them as they are, rather than as characters in our internal drama. Perhaps the second greatest gift is declining to identify with the projections others place on us. The truth is, authentic relationship becomes possible only when both parties commit to this withdrawal of projections. Until then, we're not relating to each other, but to imagined versions of each other. In relationships where hidden hatred persists, this authenticity may never fully emerge, but your clarity about the dynamic, your refusal to be defined by it, creates a foundation for healthier connections elsewhere. Ask yourself, where am I still trying to correct someone's perception of me, rather than recognizing it as their projection?
Where am I still taking personally what isn't actually about me? The answers reveal where you remain caught in unconscious patterns, still hoping to change what may be unchangeable. What if I told you that sometimes the most transformative response to hidden hatred isn't confronting or fixing it, but recognizing its nature and adjusting your expectations accordingly? What if acceptance of what is not what you wish it were offers the clearest path forward? Jung understood that true psychological freedom comes not from changing external reality to match our desires, but from seeing reality clearly and responding from that clarity. The relationships where hidden resentment festers offer precisely this opportunity to see clearly, to respond wisely, to grow in ways that transcend the immediate pain. This doesn't minimize the real hurt these dynamics cause. It transforms how we carry that hurt, not as evidence of our inadequacy, but as the natural consequence of unconscious forces we didn't create and cannot control. When someone secretly harbors hatred toward you while presenting a different face, the confusion isn't yours to solve. The contradiction exists within them. Your task isn't to resolve their internal conflict, but to recognize it for what it is and respond accordingly. This recognition brings us full circle to the weather metaphor. You cannot stop the storms in others' emotional landscapes, but you can build shelter. You can learn when to seek higher ground. You can develop an inner climate that remains relatively stable despite external turbulence. The shadow within others will find expression, if not consciously, then unconsciously, if not directly, then indirectly. Your power lies not in preventing this expression, but in recognizing it without absorbing it as truth about you. The battlefield within others will claim casualties. Their unconscious conflicts will impact those around them. Your power lies not in stopping the battle, but in refusing to believe it's your war to fight. As we continue exploring these hidden currents in relationships, remember the goal isn't to become suspicious of everyone around you. It's to develop discernment that allows you to invest in connections with the capacity for authenticity while protecting yourself from those defined by projection. Jung believed that consciousness itself is transformative. By bringing awareness to these dynamics, by recognizing the shadow at work, the projections in play, the archetypal patterns unfolding, you change your relationship to them. You're no longer simply reacting from unconscious triggers. You're responding from a place of greater psychological clarity. This clarity doesn't guarantee comfortable relationships, but it guarantees that whatever discomfort arises, you'll meet it as valuable information rather than meaningless suffering. What if I told you that even the most painful relationship dynamics contain seeds of your own liberation? What if the very connections that cause the deepest wounds also offer the most profound opportunities for growth? Jung would see this paradox not as cruel irony, but as the psyche's intelligence at work, using external relationships to illuminate internal realities that seek recognition and integration. The question shifts from why is this happening to me to what is this revealing to me? From victimhood to agency, from reaction to response. This shift doesn't happen once and for all. It requires ongoing practice, a commitment to consciousness, even when unconscious forces pull in the opposite direction. But with each choice to see clearly rather than react blindly, with each decision to respond from awareness rather than habit, the pattern changes, not just within the specific relationship, but within your entire approach to human connection. The relationships marked by hidden resentment become paradoxically teachers of discernment. They sharpen your ability to distinguish between authentic connection and projected illusion, between what nurtures and what depletes, between what merits your energy
and what doesn't. This discernment isn't cynicism, it's clarity, the ability to see what is rather than what you wish were true. Jung understood that this clarity comes at a price. It requires relinquishing comfortable illusions, facing painful realities, and acknowledging the shadow, both others and your own. But he also recognized that the cost of remaining unconscious is far greater, a life defined by reaction rather than choice, by patterns rather than possibilities.
The hidden hatred others harbor toward you reveals much about them, but your response to that revelation reveals even more about you, about your relationship to yourself, your boundaries, your worth, your capacity for honest seeing. Ask yourself, how am I growing through this challenging dynamic? What strengths am I developing that wouldn't emerge in easier relationships? What clarity am I gaining that comfort might never provide? The answers reveal not just what you're enduring, but what you're becoming through the endurance. What if I told you that the relationships that challenge you most aren't obstacles to your development, but catalysts for it? What if the connections that seem to diminish you actually contain the seeds of your expansion? Jung would view this apparent contradiction as the psyche's paradoxical wisdom, using what appears destructive to create what ultimately strengthens. This doesn't mean seeking out or remaining in harmful dynamics. It means extracting their value when they occur, recognizing their function in your broader psychological development. The truth is, relationships where hidden resentment operates offer mirrors unlike any others, reflecting back to you not just who you are, but who you're becoming. Not just your wounds, but your capacity to heal them. Not just your triggers, but your ability to transform them into gateways of understanding. These challenging connections reveal where you still abandon yourself to gain others' approval, where you still doubt your perception to maintain harmony, where you still compromise your integrity to avoid conflict. But they also reveal your growing edges, where you're learning to trust yourself despite gaslighting, to maintain boundaries despite resistance, to value your experience despite invalidation. This integration of the wounds and the healing, the challenges and the growth they inspire, brings us to the essence of Jung's vision, a psyche moving toward wholeness, not despite life's difficulties, but through them. As we continue exploring the final signs of hidden hatred, remember that recognizing these patterns isn't about fostering paranoia. It's about developing the psychological clarity that allows for authentic choice rather than unconscious reaction. It's about reclaiming your power, not by changing others, but by changing how you perceive and respond to them. In Jung's understanding, this shift in perception constitutes the most profound transformation possible, from being defined by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding. In Jung's understanding, this shift in perception constitutes the most profound transformation possible, from being defined by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding. This brings us to the final 5 signs of hidden hatred in close relationships, signs that, when recognized, contain not just warnings, but opportunities for transformation. The 11th sign manifests in information control. Someone harboring secret resentment will withhold crucial information, creating situations where you're disadvantaged by what you don't know. This might look like the colleague who forgets to mention an important meeting, the friend who doesn't tell you about a gathering until the last minute, the family member who keeps you in the dark about decisions that affect you. This withholding isn't random forgetfulness. It follows a pattern, depriving you of exactly the information that would empower you while providing plausible deniability for the person withholding it. Jung would recognize this as the shadow gatekeeper at work, the aspect of the psyche that controls what passes between realms. In relationships, this archetype manifests as the one who decides what you deserve to know. Ask yourself, Do I consistently find myself the last to know important information with a specific person? Do they seem to have different standards for what they share with me versus others? The transformation potential lies in recognizing how information functions as power. When you identify this pattern, you can develop alternative information channels rather than remaining dependent on someone who uses knowledge as control. What if I told you that this recognition could free you from the confusion of constantly missing pieces in your understanding? What if acknowledging this pattern allowed you to seek what you need elsewhere, rather than repeatedly expecting it from sources that consistently withhold? The 12th sign speaks through mimicry, subtle mockery disguised as imitation. The colleague who repeats your ideas in a slightly exaggerated tone. The friend who mirrors your speech patterns with barely perceptible distortion. The family member who echoes your words with altered emphasis that changes their meaning. This mimicry operates at the edge of awareness, noticeable enough to unsettle you, subtle enough that pointing it out would seem paranoid or overly sensitive. Jung would view this as the shadow trickster's expression, using distorted reflection to undermine while maintaining deniability. The trickster doesn't confront directly but destabilizes through subtle subversion. Notice the emotional impact of this behavior, the sense of being subtly ridiculed without clear evidence, leaving you questioning your perception rather than their intention. The transformation opportunity here involves trusting your emotional response, even when the trigger seems minor. The discomfort you feel isn't oversensitivity, it's your intuition recognizing hostility that manifests through nuance rather than obvious aggression. What if I told you that acknowledging this subtle mockery wasn't pettiness but psychological accuracy? What if your discomfort contains wisdom about dynamics others might miss? The 13th sign appears in credit and blame asymmetry. Someone secretly harboring negative feelings will consistently take credit for successes you contributed to, while ensuring you shoulder blame for shared failures. This asymmetry reveals the shadow judge and victim archetypes working in tandem, punishing you while exonerating themselves. Jung understood that these archetypes often operate as pairs, creating complex dynamics that serve unconscious needs. Have you noticed someone who positions themselves as the hero in successes you helped create, but casts you as the villain when things go wrong? Who finds ways to highlight their contributions while minimizing yours? Who ensures others know about your mistakes while keeping their own private? This pattern serves the shadow's need to maintain superiority while expressing hostility. By elevating themselves at your expense, they satisfy unconscious resentment without acknowledging it directly. The transformation potential lies in recognizing your true contributions regardless of external validation. When you know your worth independent of others' acknowledgement, you become less vulnerable to this manipulation. Ask yourself, am I seeking affirmation from someone fundamentally invested in diminishing me? Could I redirect this energy toward connections that offer fairer recognition? What if I told you that the painful recognition of this asymmetry could free you from the cycle of seeking validation from sources designed to withhold it? What if this awareness could redirect your efforts toward more reciprocal relationships? The 14th sign reveals itself in subtle sabotage, small actions that undermine your efforts or well-being while appearing insignificant in isolation.
The colleague who accidentally omits your name from important communications. The friend who shares information that puts you at a disadvantage. The family member who creates obstacles to your success through seemingly innocent actions. This sabotage operates through accumulation. No single incident seems worth addressing, but together they form a pattern of obstruction that can't be coincidental. Jung would recognize this as the shadow saboteur at work, the aspect of the psyche that destroys indirectly when direct aggression feels forbidden.
The saboteur expresses hostility through actions that maintain plausible deniability. Notice the signature of this pattern. The harm always benefits the person causing it. The accidents consistently disadvantage you in specific ways, and confrontation typically results in minimization or denial. The transformation opportunity here involves documenting patterns rather than isolated incidents. When you track the accumulation of coincidences, the intentional pattern becomes undeniable, at least to yourself. What if I told you that recognizing subtle sabotage isn't paranoia, but pattern recognition? What if your discomfort with someone's accidents contains intelligence about intentions they won't openly acknowledge? The 15th and final sign manifests in scapegoating, making you the repository for problems you didn't create. The group's tension somehow becomes your fault. Collective failures get attributed to your influence. Relationship difficulties are framed as stemming from your character rather than interaction dynamics. This scapegoating serves the classic psychological function Jung recognized, projecting the collective shadow onto a designated carrier, allowing others to maintain an illusion of innocence or superiority. Have you found yourself consistently cast as the problem in a relationship or group, regardless of your actual behavior? Does changing your approach somehow never address the core complaint? Do the accusations shift to maintain your position as the designated problem? This pattern reveals the shadow projector at work, the aspect of the psyche that cannot bear its own darkness and must locate it elsewhere. By making you the container for disowned material, others temporarily escape confronting what they refuse to see in themselves. The transformation potential here is profound. When you recognize you've been cast as the scapegoat, you can decline the role, not through argument or defense, which often reinforce the projection, but through a quiet internal refusal to carry what isn't yours. Ask yourself, what would change if I stopped trying to prove I'm not the problem and simply held that knowledge internally? What energy might be freed by releasing the burden of others' projections? What if I told you that the most powerful response to scapegoating isn't defense, but disengagement from the underlying premise? What if your liberation begins the moment you stop trying to disprove what was never actually about you? These final 5 signs, information control, subtle mockery, credit, blame, asymmetry, accumulated sabotage and scapegoating, complete our map of hidden hatred's manifestations. But recognizing these signs is merely the beginning of their transformative potential. The deeper invitation lies in what Jung called shadow integration, the process of bringing unconscious material into awareness where it can be acknowledged and ultimately transformed. While you cannot integrate someone else's shadow for them, you can integrate your responses to their projections. You can bring awareness to how their behavior affects you, what it triggers in you, and how you typically react. This integration happens when you acknowledge your emotional responses without judgment. The anger, hurt, confusion, or self-doubt that arises in these relationships isn't weakness. It's information about what needs attention within your own psyche. Recognize patterns of reaction. Do you automatically doubt yourself when challenged? Abandon your perception to maintain peace. Shrink to avoid conflict. These patterns reveal where your own healing work lies. Distinguish between what belongs to you and what doesn't. The criticism may be theirs, but the wounded place it touches belongs to your history. The rejection may come from them, but the fear it awakens was there before they arrived. Jung believed that shadow integration doesn't eliminate difficult emotions or experiences. It transforms our relationship to them by bringing them into the sphere of choice rather than compulsion. The truth is, you cannot control whether someone harbors hidden hatred toward you, but you can control how you respond, whether you internalize their projections or recognize them as expressions of their own unintegrated material. What if I told you that the way you respond to others' shadows shapes your own psychological development? What if these difficult dynamics are not just painful experiences to endure, but opportunities to reclaim disowned aspects of yourself? This perspective allows us to reframe relationship difficulties not as obstacles to happiness, but as opportunities for individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming psychologically whole. Consider how relationship challenges foster individuation. They reveal where you abandon yourself to gain approval, highlighting where you need to develop stronger internal validation. They show where you doubt your perception to maintain harmony, pointing to where you need to trust your experience more fully. They expose where you accept mistreatment as normal, indicating where you need to establish healthier boundaries. They illuminate where you take responsibility for others' emotions, suggesting where you need to practice appropriate differentiation. Each of these revelations offers an invitation to reclaim a disowned aspect of yourself, your authority, your perception, your worth, your separateness. In Jung's understanding, this reclamation constitutes the core of psychological healing. Seen through this lens, even the most painful relationship dynamics serve your becoming, not because suffering itself has value, but because these difficulties illuminate exactly where your growth edges lie. This doesn't mean remaining in harmful situations. Sometimes the wisest response to hidden hatred is distance or departure, but even then the encounter serves individuation if you extract its lessons rather than simply escaping its discomfort. Ask yourself, what aspects of myself have I abandoned or suppressed in this relationship? What strengths am I being called to develop? What truths am I being asked to acknowledge? The answers map your individuation journey, the path towards psychological wholeness that difficult relationships often catalyze. What if I told you that the relationships that hurt most often contribute most to your becoming? What if the connections that seem to diminish you actually contain the seeds of your expansion? Jung understood this paradox, that what appears destructive often serves creation, that what causes pain frequently fosters growth. Not because suffering itself has value, but because difficulty reveals what comfort conceals. This understanding allows us to trace the journey from unconscious projection to conscious integration, the path from being controlled by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding.
This journey typically moves through stages. First comes confusion, the sense that something is wrong, but you can't quite name it. The inconsistency between words and energy, between stated intentions and impact, creates cognitive dissonance that signals pay attention. Next comes recognition, identifying specific patterns rather than isolated incidents. You begin to see how separate behaviors form a coherent picture, revealing intentionality beneath the appearance of randomness. Then emerges the pain of clarity, the grief of acknowledging what you've likely known intuitively, but rejected consciously. This stage often involves mourning the relationship you thought you had or hoped you could create. After this comes differentiation, separating your worth from others' treatment, your reality from their projections, your responsibility from what belongs to them. This stage establishes psychological boundaries that protect your sense of self. Finally arrives integration, incorporating the lessons, strength, and wisdom gained through the difficult dynamic. You emerge not just surviving but transformed, more discerning, more authentic, more whole. This journey doesn't unfold linearly or once and for all. You may cycle through these stages repeatedly, integrating different aspects of the experience at different times. But the direction remains consistent, moving from unconscious reaction to conscious response, from confusion to clarity, from fragmentation to greater wholeness. The truth is, hidden hatred in relationships offers one of the most potent catalysts for this journey,
precisely because it creates such profound cognitive dissonance. The gap between what's stated and what's felt, between the mask and what it conceals, demands resolution. What if I told you that this resolution doesn't require the other person's acknowledgement or change? What if your healing depends not on their recognition of their shadow, but on your integration of how you've responded to it? Jung believed that genuine psychological growth happens when we shift from seeking external validation to developing internal authority, from needing others to affirm our reality to trusting our own experience. Relationships where hidden resentment operates force exactly this shift, often because external validation becomes so obviously unreliable that internal authority emerges as the only viable alternative. This brings us to practical steps for addressing hidden resentment in relationships, approaches that honor both the reality of the dynamic and the opportunity for growth it contains. First, validate your own experience. Before seeking external confirmation or confronting the other person, acknowledge what you feel and sense. The confusion, hurt, or unease you experience contains wisdom worth honoring. Second, document patterns rather than incidents. Instead of focusing on isolated behaviors that seem minor in themselves, track repetitions that reveal consistent intention. This documentation helps combat gaslighting, both from others and your own doubt. Third, seek perspective from uninvolved others you trust. While external validation isn't the ultimate goal, input from those not emotionally invested in the dynamic can help calibrate your perception and reduce self-doubt. Fourth, adjust your expectations based on patterns rather than potential. Interact with the person as they consistently demonstrate themselves to be, not as you hope they might become. This realistic assessment prevents repeated disappointment and harm. Fifth, establish boundaries that reflect reality rather than wishful thinking. These might involve limiting certain types of interaction, reducing emotional investment, or in some cases creating distance from the relationship altogether. Sixth, redirect your energy toward connections that offer authenticity rather than trying to transform those defined by projection. The effort spent trying to correct others' perceptions of you might better serve building relationships where you're seen more clearly. Seventh, extract the growth opportunity by asking, what strength is this difficulty calling forth in me? What disowned aspect of myself is seeking reclamation through this challenge? What truth about myself or relationships am I being asked to acknowledge? These steps aren't about controlling or changing the other person. They're about responding to reality from a place of agency rather than reaction, clarity rather than confusion, choice rather than habit. Jung understood that we cannot control how others see us or what they project onto us, but we can control whether we identify with their projections, whether we accept their distorted image as an accurate reflection of who we are. The moment you recognize projection at work, you're free to respond to the reality of the relationship rather than the illusion it sometimes presents. You're free to say, silently or aloud, that may be who I am in your psyche, but it isn't who I am in reality. This distinction between who you are and who you become in others' internal landscapes contains profound liberation. It allows you to engage with difficult dynamics without being defined by them. What if I told you that this liberation doesn't require the other person's agreement or validation? What if your freedom begins in perception rather than permission? Jung believed that consciousness itself transforms experience. By bringing awareness to these dynamics, by recognizing the shadow at work, the projections in play, the archetypal patterns unfolding, you change your relationship to them. This brings us to a transformational perspective on past relationship pain, a way of understanding difficult connections not just as wounds to heal, but as initiations into deeper self-knowledge.
Consider how past relationships where hidden resentment operated have shaped you. They've developed your capacity to trust your perception, even when others invalidate it. They've strengthened your ability to maintain boundaries, despite resistance or manipulation. They've enhanced your skill at distinguishing between projection and reality. They've deepened your compassion for yourself and others, caught in unconscious patterns. Each of these developments represents not just healing from damage, but growth that might not have occurred through easier paths. Jung would view this transformation not as coincidental, but essential, the psyche's movement toward wholeness, using whatever material life provides, including its difficulties. Ask yourself, how have challenging relationships expanded my capacity, awareness, or strength? What do I understand now that I couldn't have learned through more comfortable connections? The answers reveal not just what you've survived, but how you've been transformed through the survival. What if I told you that the relationships that have hurt you most have also shaped you most profoundly? What if the connections that seemed designed to diminish you actually contained the seeds of your expansion? This perspective doesn't romanticize suffering or excuse harmful behavior. It extracts meaning and growth from experiences you didn't choose but nonetheless encountered. It transforms past pain from something that happened to you into something that happened for your development. Jung believed that finding meaning in difficulty doesn't erase the difficulty itself, but it changes our relationship to it from meaningless suffering to challenge with purpose, from random pain to initiatory experience. This transformation in perspective allows us to carry past relationship wounds not as evidence of our inadequacy or others' malice, but as testament to our capacity for growth through challenge.
The truth is, relationships where hidden resentment operates often serve as powerful initiations, confronting us with challenges that force growth we might otherwise avoid. Not because suffering itself has value, but because these difficulties illuminate exactly where our development lies. This understanding calls us to introspection, to examining not just others' behavior, but our responses to it, not to assign blame to ourselves, but to locate our agency within dynamics we didn't create, but nonetheless participate in. What patterns of response have you developed to others' hidden resentment? Do you automatically doubt yourself when challenged? Abandon your perception to maintain peace? Shrink to avoid conflict? Overcompensate to prove your worth? These patterns reveal where your own healing work lies, the places where past experiences have created automatic reactions that may no longer serve you. Jung believed that bringing these patterns into awareness is the first and most crucial step toward transformation. What operates unconsciously controls us. What we become conscious of, we can choose to engage differently. This choice, to respond from awareness rather than react from habit, constitutes personal liberation. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. Not control over others' behavior, but sovereignty over your own responses. What if I told you that this liberation doesn't require changing others or even changing your circumstances? What if it begins in the space between stimulus and response, in that moment of awareness where choice becomes possible? Jung understood that genuine freedom isn't the absence of limitation, but the presence of choice within whatever circumstances we encounter. The relationships where hidden resentment operates often seem to limit our choices, presenting impossible binaries: accept mistreatment or lose the connection, trust your perception or maintain harmony, speak your truth or keep the peace. But consciousness expands these apparent binaries into a field of possibilities. You can maintain appropriate connection without accepting mistreatment. You can trust your perception while acknowledging others. You can speak your truth kindly rather than choosing between honesty and compassion. This expansion of possibility through consciousness represents the core of personal liberation, moving from reaction to response, from habit to choice, from unconscious participation to conscious engagement. The journey through recognizing and responding to hidden hatred in relationships ultimately leads here to the liberation of becoming more fully yourself, more capable of authentic connection, more aligned with your own truth, even when others cannot or will not see it. This liberation doesn't happen once and for all. It requires ongoing practice, a commitment to consciousness, even when unconscious forces pull in the opposite direction. But with each choice to see clearly rather than react blindly, with each decision to respond from awareness rather than habit, the pattern changes. Not just within the specific relationship, but within your entire approach to human connection. What if I told you that this ongoing practice of consciousness constitutes the most profound work we can undertake? What if the quality of all your relationships, including your relationship with yourself, depends on this commitment to awareness? Jung believed that consciousness transforms not just our inner landscape, but our outer relationships. Not by changing others, but by changing how we perceive and respond to them. When you recognize that someone's hidden hatred toward you reflects their internal conflict rather than your worth, you stop trying to fix what you didn't break. You stop internalizing messages that were never actually about you. This recognition doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Sometimes the wisest response to projected shadow is to create distance or boundaries, but even then you leave differently, carrying understanding rather than just hurt, lessons rather than just wounds. This understanding brings us full circle to where we began, recognizing the signs of hidden hatred not to foster paranoia, but to develop the psychological clarity that allows for authentic choice rather than unconscious reaction. The 15 signs we've explored, from inconsistent eye contact to information control, from selective memory to scapegoating, serve as indicators not just of others' shadow material, but of opportunities for your own growth and liberation. By recognizing these patterns, you free yourself from the confusion they create. By understanding their psychological meaning, you stop taking personally what isn't about you. By responding with consciousness, you transform reactions into choices. This transformation from unconscious participation to conscious engagement constitutes the heart of Jung's vision for psychological development. Not perfection, but integration. Not absence of shadow, but awareness of its operations. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. The truth is, relationships where hidden resentment operates offer precisely this opportunity to see clearly, to respond wisely, to grow in ways that transcend the immediate pain. Ask yourself, what would change if I approached difficult relationship dynamics not just as problems to solve or wounds to heal, but as opportunities to become more fully myself? What might I discover if I viewed others' hidden resentment as revealing not just their shadows, but my own growing edges? Your answers map not just a response to specific relationship challenges, but an approach to life itself, an orientation toward difficulty that extracts its growth potential rather than simply enduring its discomfort. What if I told you that this orientation, this commitment to finding meaning and growth within difficulty, represents one of the most powerful choices we can make? What if the quality of your life depends less on what happens to you and more on how you relate to what happens? Jung believed that consciousness transforms experience not by changing its content, but by changing our relationship to it. The painful dynamics we've explored remain painful when conscious, but consciousness adds meaning, purpose, and choice to what would otherwise be simply suffering.
This transformation in relationship to experience, from meaningless pain to meaningful challenge, allows us to carry difficult dynamics differently, not as evidence of our inadequacy or others' malice, but as testament to the complexity of human psychology and the opportunities for growth it presents. As our exploration draws to a close, remember, the goal isn't to become suspicious of everyone around you. It's to develop discernment that allows you to invest in connections with the capacity for authenticity while protecting yourself from those defined by projection. It's to recognize that while you cannot control how others see you or what they project onto you, you can control whether you identify with their projections, whether you accept their distorted image as an accurate reflection of who you are. It's to understand that the most loving response to hidden hatred isn't always confrontation or correction. Sometimes it's simply refusing to play the assigned role in unconscious dynamics, stepping out of patterns that diminish rather than develop your authentic self. This refusal, this quiet internal no to participating in destructive patterns, creates space for something new to emerge.
Not by changing others, but by changing your own participation in the dynamic. Jung understood that genuine transformation rarely announces itself dramatically. It happens in moments of choice that might seem insignificant in isolation, but accumulate to change the entire pattern of our lives. The choice to trust your perception despite gaslighting, to maintain boundaries despite resistance, to value your experience despite invalidation, to seek connection where authenticity is possible, rather than trying to create it where projection prevails. These choices, made consistently over time, constitute not just a response to hidden hatred, but an approach to relationship itself, an orientation toward human connection that prioritizes authenticity over accommodation, truth over comfort, growth over stasis. What if I told you that this orientation, this commitment to conscious relationship, represents one of the most profound contributions you can make? What if the quality of all your connections depends on this ongoing practice of awareness? Jung believed that consciousness ripples outward, transforming not just individual lives, but collective experience. When we withdraw our projections and engage with others as they are, rather than as characters in our internal drama, we create space for authentic meeting. This authentic meeting, this connection between who we actually are, rather than who we imagine or fear each other to be, constitutes the heart of meaningful relationship. Not perfect understanding, but genuine encounter, not absence of difficulty, but presence with each other within it. The relationships where hidden resentment operates often seem to make such authentic meeting impossible. The projections run too deep, the shadows loom too large, the patterns feel too entrenched, but consciousness creates possibility where none seem to exist. Not by forcing change in others, but by transforming how we engage, moving from unconscious reaction to conscious response, from habitual patterns to chosen actions, from projection to perception. This transformation, this shift from being defined by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding, constitutes the most profound liberation possible. Not freedom from challenge, but freedom within it. Not control over others, but sovereignty over your own responses. As you continue your journey of recognizing and responding to hidden hatred in relationships, remember, the goal isn't to eliminate difficulty, but to engage with it consciously, not to avoid shadow, but to bring it into awareness where it can be integrated rather than projected. This ongoing practice of consciousness, this commitment to seeing clearly, responding wisely, and growing through challenge, transforms not just how you navigate difficult relationships, but how you engage with life itself. What if I told you that this transformation, this movement from unconscious reaction to conscious response, represents the core of human development? What if the quality of your life depends less on what happens to you and more on how you relate to what happens? Jung believed that finding meaning in difficulty doesn't eliminate the difficulty itself, but it changes our relationship to it, from meaningless suffering to challenge with purpose, from random pain to opportunity for growth. This change in perspective allows us to carry relationship challenges not as burdens that diminish us, but as initiations that develop us, confronting us with precisely the difficulties needed for our unique psychological growth. The truth is, relationships where hidden resentment operates often serve this initiatory function, revealing exactly where our work lies, highlighting exactly what we need to reclaim or develop, illuminating exactly where consciousness needs to expand. By recognizing these dynamics for what they are, expressions of the shadow, projections of disowned parts, manifestations of unconscious conflicts, you reclaim the power to respond rather than merely react. This reclamation, this shift from unconscious participation to conscious engagement, constitutes the heart of personal liberation, not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it, not absence of challenge, but presence with it. As you move forward, carrying the awareness these reflections have offered, consider what would change if you approached difficult relationship dynamics not as problems to solve or wounds to endure, but as opportunities to become more fully yourself. Your answer maps not just a response to specific relationship challenges, but an approach to life itself, an orientation toward difficulty that extracts its growth potential rather than simply surviving its discomfort. This orientation, this commitment to consciousness even when unconscious forces pull in the opposite direction, transforms not just how you navigate hidden hatred in relationships, but how you engage with all of life's complexities. If you found value in these reflections, consider deepening your engagement with this work. Share your insights with others walking similar paths. Apply these perspectives to your own relationship challenges. Continue developing the psychological clarity that allows for authentic choice rather than unconscious reaction. The journey from recognizing hidden hatred to responding with consciousness isn't a destination but an ongoing practice, a commitment to awareness that transforms not just specific relationships but your entire approach to human connection. This transformation from unconscious participation to conscious engagement constitutes the most profound work we can undertake, not because it eliminates difficulty, but because it finds meaning within it. Not because it changes others, but because it changes how we perceive and respond to them. Jung believed that this shift in perception represents the essential human task, the movement from being controlled by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding. As you continue this movement, this journey toward greater consciousness in all your relationships, remember the patterns we've explored aren't just warnings about others' hidden resentment, they're invitations to your own psychological development. By recognizing these patterns, you free yourself from the confusion they create. By understanding their psychological meaning, you stop taking personally what isn't about you. By responding with consciousness, you transform reactions into choices. This transformation, this ongoing practice of awareness, changes not just how you navigate difficult relationships, but how you engage with all of life's complexities. What if I told you that this change in perception constitutes the most profound liberation possible? What if freedom begins not in changing circumstances, but in transforming how you relate to them? Jung understood that genuine psychological development happens not by eliminating shadow, but by bringing it into awareness, where it can be integrated rather than projected.
The same applies to navigating relationships where hidden resentment lurks.
By bringing consciousness to these dynamics, you change your relationship to them. You're no longer caught in unconscious reactivity. You're no longer taking personally what isn't about you. You're no longer doubting your perception when your body is sending clear signals. This clarity doesn't guarantee the relationship will heal, but it guarantees that you will be approaching it from a place of psychological integrity rather than confusion. As you continue developing this clarity in all your relationships, remember, the goal isn't to become suspicious of everyone around you. It's to develop discernment that allows you to invest in connections with the capacity for authenticity while protecting yourself from those defined by projection. It's to recognize that while you cannot control how others see you or what they project onto you, you can control whether you identify with their projections, whether you accept their distorted image as an accurate reflection of who you are. This recognition, this distinction between who you are and who you become in others' internal landscapes, contains the key to authentic relationship. Not by changing others, but by refusing to be defined by their perceptions. When you step out of these unconscious castings, you create space for something new to emerge, not by forcing change in others, but by changing your own participation in the dynamic. This change, this shift from unconscious reaction to conscious response, transforms not just specific relationships, but your entire approach to human connection. What if I told you that this transformation represents one of the most profound contributions you can make? What if the quality of all your connections depends on this ongoing practice of awareness? Jung believed that consciousness ripples outward, transforming not just individual lives but collective experience. When we withdraw our projections and engage with others as they are rather than as characters in our internal drama, we create space for authentic meeting. This authentic meeting, this connection between who we actually are, rather than who we imagine or fear each other to be, constitutes the heart of meaningful relationship. Not perfect understanding, but genuine encounter. Not absence of difficulty, but presence with each other within it. The work of recognizing and responding to hidden hatred in relationships ultimately leads here to the possibility of more authentic connection with ourselves and others. Not by eliminating shadow, but by bringing it into awareness where it can be integrated rather than projected. This integration, this ongoing practice of consciousness, transforms not just how you navigate difficult relationships, but how you engage with all of life's complexities. As you continue this practice, remember, the goal isn't to reach some final state of perfect awareness, but to engage in the ongoing process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness, not to eliminate difficulty, but to find meaning within it. Not to avoid shadow, but to integrate it through awareness. This ongoing process, this commitment to consciousness, even when unconscious forces pull in the opposite direction, constitutes the heart of human development. Not perfection, but integration. Not absence of shadow, but awareness of its operations. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. What if I told you that this commitment, this ongoing practice of awareness, represents the most profound work we can undertake? What if the quality of your life depends less on what happens to you and more on how you relate to what happens? Jung believed that finding meaning in difficulty doesn't eliminate the difficulty itself, but it changes our relationship to it, from meaningless suffering to challenge with purpose, from random pain to opportunity for growth. This change in perspective allows us to carry relationship challenges not as burdens that diminish us, but as initiations that develop us, confronting us with precisely the difficulties needed for our unique psychological growth. The truth is, relationships where hidden resentment operates often serve this initiatory function, revealing exactly where our work lies, highlighting exactly what we need to reclaim or develop, illuminating exactly where consciousness needs to expand. By recognizing these dynamics for what they are, expressions of the shadow, projections of disowned parts, manifestations of unconscious conflicts, you reclaim the power to respond rather than merely react. This reclamation, this shift from unconscious participation to conscious engagement, constitutes the heart of personal liberation, not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. Not absence of challenge, but presence with it. As you move forward carrying the awareness these reflections have offered, consider how you might apply these perspectives to your own relationship challenges. How might you recognize the signs of hidden hatred without becoming paranoid? How might you respond to unconscious projections without internalizing them? How might you extract growth from difficulty without romanticizing suffering? Your answers map not just responses to specific relationship challenges, but an approach to life itself, an orientation toward difficulty that extracts its growth potential rather than simply enduring its discomfort. This orientation, this commitment to consciousness, even when unconscious forces pull in the opposite direction, transforms not just how you navigate hidden hatred in relationships, but how you engage with all of life's complexities. If you've found value in these reflections, I invite you to deepen your engagement with this work. Subscribe to continue exploring these psychological territories together. Share your insights in the comments to build community around these challenging but transformative dynamics. Consider how these perspectives might illuminate not just your relationships with others, but your relationship with yourself. The journey from recognizing hidden hatred to responding with consciousness isn't a destination but an ongoing practice, a commitment to awareness that transforms not just specific relationships, but your entire approach to human connection. This transformation from unconscious participation to conscious engagement constitutes the most profound work we can undertake, not because it eliminates difficulty, but because it finds meaning within it. Not because it changes others, but because it changes how we perceive and respond to them. Jung believed that this shift in perception represents the essential human task, the movement from being controlled by unconscious forces to becoming a conscious participant in your own unfolding.